Okay, hey everybody, Dan here, and I want to show you the Solana ETF, these volatility shares, 2x Solana. So this thing moves a lot. I know you're not looking at the chart yet, and hey, this is as good as it gets. No. So this thing moves a lot and it doesn't necessarily move in sync with Solana. I mean, generally it does, and Solana's setting up to where it's really starting to make a pretty good move, at least according to my compadre Scott. It's really doing well. In fact, I will show you right here how this is doing. Let me share my screen. Not that you have a choice. Okay. So you can see how Solana, this is a daily chart. It's been trending nicely right along this key moving average. If we look at the weekly, we'll look at the weekly chart here. Forget about the moving averages now, but you can see where it's got just this flat top, a really solid flat top here. And if this stock starts to break out like above there, this is going to have a really nice move. And so I want to start getting in a little bit early, but because I tend to be a greedy sucker, I want to see if I can get more bang for my buck. So this doesn't look like much, but this is almost 7% price appreciation, and it's just kind of chopping around. The reason I'm saying that is because this is kind of not for the faint of heart. You can get these big swings. And so if you try to manage your position, if you try to manage your risk by keeping pretty tight stops, you're going to have a hard time not getting shaken out because the stock can really move. And also, one thing that you may not notice here, this is really gappy. It gaps all the time, like in a big way. Here, this thing gapped up over 10%, 11%. And then from here, it gaps down 6%. Then the next day, gaps down over 10%. I mean, this thing is, you're on a real wild ride here, 43, 44% in a matter of what, a week, little over a week in trading, 6 days. So this is one that it can either kill you or make you really happy. And so what I did was and by the way, members, I'm going into a lot of detail on this. I'm not going to go into it now. I'll go into a lot of detail about how to build big position sizes without incurring more risk. In fact, actually how to take less risk while you're giving yourself more upside exposure. Not going to go into that now. I'm just telling you that on something like this, you would want to start with a small position, and then once the stock starts working in your favor, maybe runs up above like this level here. Once it starts working in your favor, that's when you start building a position, taking, it's up 10%. You can raise your stop up a little bit and then take more stock. And then gradually, as Solana starts moving, and they are going to be starting ETF, Scott says he thinks like maybe in a month or something like that. That's when I think this thing's really going to get going. So that's all I have for you. But one thing, I'm totally serious about this. If you are not, I'm just telling you, if you are not a member of Crypto Market Mentor, you are truly missing the boat. Like you're missing, Scott is doing amazing work. I was just telling a friend of mine, not associated with me or with Scott or anybody else, but I was just telling him that if I really just wanted to make easy money, kind of like retire, which is always enticing to me, but I'll never probably do it. They'll have to drag me out with the toe tag. But if I just really wanted to retire and not do very much, I swear, I said, I would just subscribe to crypto. Well, I don't have to just subscribe to Crypto Market Mentor because I own it. Scott and I are partners. But I would just go on Crypto Market Mentor and just trade what Scott's trading. I just follow Scott and apply my technical analysis, what I know, to Scott's analysis, and I would make a crap load of money. And so the nice thing is, you can do that. You can do that. And I'll challenge you on this. And you can get on Telegram, and they have a really active Telegram channel. A really active Telegram channel. These guys, I just talked to one lady last week. She's a member, and she told me she almost kind of had tears in her eyes. She said, I have made life-changing money with Scott. And so, am I kind of pounding the table here? I can't because it'll shake the camera. Watch. See, I can't do that. But I am just telling you this. I'm doing the hard sell here. You need to at least try a subscription. What I think it's $7 or something. If you can't afford $7, then you're not a trader. But you need to look at Scott's work. You will make money. I flipping promise you. If you don't make money, I'll give you your $7 back. How's that? Just email Karen and say, I want Dan to send me a personal check for $7 and I'll do it if it means that much to you. But one last thing, I'll leave you with this. I don't know why, but Dean Graziosi is a friend of mine. I'd have to say he's an acquaintance. I haven't seen him in years, but I was talking to him. He's like the real estate guy. He doesn't do that anymore. But he had like the longest running infomercial in history. It was running constantly for years all over the place. And I told him the last time I saw him, I said, like, dude, you have really aggressive sales. Like I see your infomercials and you are literally like browbeating people, telling them they have to buy, they have to do this and that. Do you ever kind of get some pushback on that? Or, I mean, how do you feel about that? And he looked at me with all sincerity and he said, you know what, Dan, honestly, if I could, I would force everybody to buy my program, to get into my program, because I have made so many millionaires, you have no idea. And so I kind of feel like I'm cheating people if I don't really, really urge them to get involved. And so I'm kind of feeling the same way about crypto. And notice now, I'm not talking about stock market mentor, option market mentor. Those are fantastic. I could pound the table on those. But if I do that, then you're going to think that I'm just trying to pitch you on one of the mentor websites. And that's not, there's another time for that, and this ain't it. What I'm doing is I am telling you that if you want to make serious money, spend $7, seven damn dollars, and subscribe to Crypto Market Mentor. You're not going to regret it. Scott does training sessions on Wednesday. Unless there's something weird that happens, I'm always at those training sessions. And other than making a couple wise ass comments here and there, typically I have my mic off, I have my camera off, and I just listen and learn from Scott. So you can be that guy or that lady too. Okay, don't screw this up. Don't blow this. Don't put yourself in a position where 2, 3, 4 years from now, when like Bitcoin, for example, which we've got a ton of it, when Bitcoin is up at 200,000 or 250,000, and be wishing that you had been in back when it was 100 or 120. I I I think our cost basis in Bitcoin is like $21,000. So obviously we've held it for a long time. But I will tell you, I had bought my first chunk of Bitcoin was at $7,000. And there were actually times like years before when hardly anybody had heard of Bitcoin, when I had intended to buy a bunch of it. This is when it's like, wait, the Winklevoss brothers, aren't those the guys that got screwed by Zuckerberg? And they're really into this Bitcoin. Well, they're pretty smart guys, but I never followed up on it. I just totally forgot about it. And so my first buys were around 7,000, and then I wound up selling. Nice profit, but I did wind up selling. As soon as I really saw what was going on, I bought it back. Cost me more money, but I bought it back. And now I will buy, I'm like William Devane on with Rosalind Capital. That's why I buy gold every chance I get. That's the way I feel about Bitcoin. I'm doing it with Ethereum and Solana too. Am I going into a lot of detail here? Yeah. Do you know why? Because I literally want to reach through the screen, pull your $7 out of your pocket, and get you a trial subscription to Crypto Market Mentor. Not Stock Market Mentor, that's me. Not Option Market Mentor, that's a little bit of me, but mostly Sam and Andy. Crypto Market Mentor, and it's all Scott all the time, all your money. You know what to do. I'll leave it at that.